serape. It's my Clint Eastwood thing. Come on. All right, so my last video has gotten me into some trouble. The iceberg is too big. Greetings, good humans, and welcome to Tabletop Alchemy, where sometimes we dig ourselves a hole and jump in and keep on digging. And we thank our patrons for supporting the construction zone that's happening here in the Alchemy Lab. Get your hard hats, because we're going downstairs. All right, so I've been expanding the lore and detailing the setting of this little skirmish game, the Cascade, and today I had planned to let you guys take a look at some of the work I've done on the Odyssey rules, which, for you veteran skirmish gamers out there, is Cascadian for narrative campaign rules. But I think just the setting stuff I've worked on will be plenty enough for this video, and we'll get to the Odyssey or campaign rules shortly. And just to be clear, my opening statement is not clickbait. My beloved process for just have fun and write as a method for developing stuff when you're stuck has definitely gotten me into trouble. It's a good kind of trouble, but you know, still a little bit scary nonetheless. I talked about how just writing stuff down and seeing what comes out is sort of like exploring the top of an iceberg without realizing it. And then, well, then you might start to realize, oh, there's a lot of stuff I'm digging up here. Wow, maybe too much stuff, which again is a probably better problem to have than, not enough stuff, right? More stuff better than not enough stuff. Oftentimes we think that's a better case, but you know, not always the case. So quickly, for those of you who haven't seen the previous videos on this project, a little skirmish game design project, what are you waiting for? There's a playlist right here. Because I'm organized. Sometimes. Anyway, the Cascade is a stack of an unknown number of spheres that house unique terrain or unique ecosystems. And when I say unique, I mean that, what am I doing? Talking to myself now instead of doing quote? I don't know what's happening. Oh boy, I think I had too much coffee this morning. When I say unique, what? Is that how you do that? Look, my Eastwood serape in the sort of spiderwebby fringe detail. I got gun belts down here. 6-shooters. Come on, man. Bastrop McGraw. All right. One more time. Now, when I say unique, I mean that the interior of each sphere is different from the interior of like any other sphere. And where two spheres touch, I should have like an illustration here instead of trying to do this with my hands. Maybe I'll have an illustration, but I can't point to because I can't be guaranteed. You know, I can't trust myself to put one here. So, you know, welcome to Tabletop Alchemy. Donuts are in the back. So if you got a stack of glass spheres or whatever, they're going to touch at these little tiny pinpoints where each sphere rests against another or touches another, right? So where two spheres touch, there are reciprocal aligned gates. I don't know if reciprocal is the right word to use here. Basically, when you open a gate on one side, it will open the gate on the other side and you can cross through. These are called transmigration gates in the game. The first sphere at the top of this stack is unique in that it doesn't have a sphere above it, right? And it's the sphere in which all newcomers to the Cascade arrive. It's like the lobby to the descending hotel. So it's a little bit unique compared to all the other spheres below it because of this fact, but you know, there's lore kind of explains. It does technically have a gate. I guess technically it doesn't have a gate, but it technically has an entry point opposite the gate that it does have that goes to the next sphere below it. Now, I've been writing up my freeform notes on what the Cascade is like, and one of the issues that came up kind of quick that I started to sort of stumble over in my brain is this, what I thought was a cool notion of a descending stack of spheres through which people would travel. And it's a notion that, a notion of this physical property of this setting that also lends itself to the name of the game, which is, or the name of the setting. The name of the game is also the name of the setting. I know what I'm doing here. I talk every day. I'm a half-century-year-old human being. I can function. The name of the game is also the name of the setting, which is the Cascade. And terminology like descending, it just sounds cool. It's great. But then I started to work on it, and right away I was like, oh, so in my mind, I'm loving the notion of a vertical stack of spheres, but people traversing interior ecosystems and terrain, they're going to be walking horizontally. So then if I have a diagram, I'll put something simple here. I know I can at least do that much. I'm thinking that what a cool idea that people can descend through this infinite stack of spheres going down into infinite space. Is it infinite? That's the question, right? Trying to figure that out. But anyway, if they're going down, that's great. But if they're, literally crossing terrain akin to what we can simulate on a tabletop, they're walking horizontally. Now, this being a sci-fi / fantasy genre thing, there's always going to be some way to justify or make up why something is the way it is without having to worry too much about, real physics or whatever, right? We can just, hey man, it's sci-fi, it's fantasy. We just make up some magic stuff and it just works. But I was thinking of what it's like to be in this place from the perspective of someone in the place. And I was like, well, if you're inside of a system like this, and to you, so everything's relative to you now, you're always on horizontal ground, and these transmigration gates are on opposing sides of a stretch of horizontal ground, then to you, the world isn't a stack of descending spheres, it's a horizontal row of spheres. I didn't like the idea of giving up this notion of the descent, that people inside the Cascade think of it. They do have, I want them to have this notion of descending and ascending if they're going back up the spheres, right? It just, I don't know why it just seems cooler to me. It has to, sticks with the whole funnel idea that I've got about how you arrive in this place, and a funnel that goes down. It's like, instead of like a funnel that goes into a right angle bend and then it's just a stack this way. There's also something to be said about the notion of being at the top of a stack of something, but being able to fall down. There's like this sort of inherent adventuresome aspect to that, or element of danger that you can fall down, right? Or climb up, versus just, I'm going to go for a walk sideways, like normal. Basically, I just think it's more dramatic and cooler to think of things in an up-down orientation than a sideways, horizontal orientation. Just another little side note here is that kind of what I run into a lot, and this has to do with, this idea of like, this iceberg idea of like, oh, I wrote down this sentence and it's like this one thing, but it implies all this other stuff. And I kind of end up just in my own sort of free flow thought of following details and stuff. I tend to get real focused on plot holes and things like that. And I like to I just inherently try to seal up plot holes or think around issues that are illogical or whatever. And of course, this again being a sci-fi fantasy setting, it doesn't really matter too much, but there's still got to be a suspension of disbelief for the audience or the reader or the player or whatever, right? And so I end up sort of focusing in on details. And then, if you don't start from a basis of logic stuff, it's kind of difficult. You're always going to run into some plot holes somewhere, right? It's just the nature of the beast. And so I spend a lot of time sometimes trying to fix things or make things seem like they don't have a plot hole. And it's just time consuming sometimes, a little bit frustrating. Anyway, I ended up writing this bit here called the orientation anomaly, which says the transmigration gates seem to have been installed uniformly at the equators, typically oriented in line with each sphere's horizon. There are exceptions. not with the equatorial placement, but with the inner sphere horizons. In other words, there can be land masses inside that don't line up exactly with a gate. Like maybe a gate is buried, it has to be excavated or whatever. And while traversing a gate always appears to be horizontal relative to those transmigrating through the gate, every single person will tell you that the feeling of falling is inescapable and always consistent. Within a mile of a gate, there is a subtle off-balance sort of experience that grows until one is acutely aware they are falling towards a gate on one side or falling away from the gate on the other side. This phenomenon has been studied and manifests the notion of polarity in the spheres. Each sphere has one gate through which one seems to fall away from, and an opposing gate to which one seems to fall toward. This polarity has allowed for basic navigation orientation and lends the Cascade both its name and the initially unintuitive notion that the spheres descend or are vertically stacked. Visually, and just like in my head, I can see and feel how this would be so cool to experience. Like, imagine how all the shots of astronauts inside space stations we see in movies and TV shows and maybe, like NASA footage, like how the astronauts are always sailing down or floating down a central tunnel thing, and they're kind of like supine, like flying like Superman sort of, right? Orientation-wise. And then their legs swing down to walk on a wall, like the wall of a room that becomes a floor when they cross into like a section of the space station that's at either end of this long tube. But I always like the visuals of that. That seems pretty cool. And that's what I'm imagining running into or encountering a transmigration gate in the Cascade is like. So you kind of think of that feeling and everything, but think of it like happening in Zion National Park or a mountain forest or something. It would just be super cool, right? You're kind of walking and then all of a sudden you're starting to float and drift slowly across the ground, and then you realize that gravity has turned 90 degrees. Anyway, there's the justification for why the Cascade is called the Cascade. So I've written up a bit about the Cascade and the spheres. I started with this first section, what is arrival like, and wrote up what I think the experience of arriving in the Cascade is like. And then I had to deal with the question of why there isn't a pile of wrecked spaceships at the bottom of the Great Well, which is a working title thing here. And I also needed to address the question of communication. So we've got this setting, right, in which people from all kinds of worlds get dumped. So how would communication be facilitated? And you can see I'm just taking a sort of fantasy road out of this one. There seems to be some kind of ether field permeating the Cascade that either facilitates instant auditory translation or the whole thing is just a dream. Again, this is just first draft stuff, and some of this stuff is just notes to myself to, hey, fix this. Now, I'm going to add a bit more to this blurb. Like, there's definitely some kind of scholar or scientist or scientific order that studies this phenomenon, so I'll come up with some title for them and mention them briefly in some of these notes or whatever. Then I moved on to the spheres in general and all the questions that were coming up about them, right? First, how big is a sphere? So what I'm rolling with now is a sphere is 1,000 miles across, 1,600 kilometers for those of you imperially challenged out there. I came to that number by looking at how long California is. Because I live here, California covers a lot of variation in biome, sort of. Like, we have deserts, we have redwood forests, we have snow-capped mountains, everything in between. So it seemed like 1,000 miles would give room for multiple big cities to be spaced far apart inside these spheres, and plenty of room to explore and house all kinds of different things. And it's also just a nice round number. And after the fact, I found out that 1,000 miles across means each sphere is almost exactly half the size of the moon. Our moon. The real moon, right? It's kind of cool. I don't know if it's like worth having that sort of like reference thing or anything. I just thought it was kind of neat. That's all. Now, I wrote up a bit on the boundary, which is what I'm calling the wall of the sphere, and how it's transparent at the gates. So you can see into the next sphere, but that transparency fades into a sort of polarized electrum color that makes the bulk of the boundary opaque. I kind of like imagined like sort of like, metallic or golden Oakley sunglasses or something like that. And oh, look at that. I forgot, I already did write up some more detail on the communication stuff, and while I was coming up with the weird names and stuff, the thought occurred to me that, oh yeah, written stuff would have to be translated as well via this ether phenomena, right? And that fact is what has all kinds of scientists and wizards in the Cascade scratching their heads and wanting to study this phenomena. And that orientation anomaly sort of led into this question of how does the day-night cycle work in this place? If there is a day-night cycle, which I think there should be, just because we can relate to that. And so I said, yeah, there is, and it's suitably vague, so it fits the vibe overall of the place. And, in a fantasy world, why can't we have it be magic hour all day? Look, I even wrote up some nonsense about 40-day months and 10-month annums, because I didn't want to use the word year, even though I just should have. But whatever, man. I'm just trying to work vibe in as much as possible, all flavor, no calories. But you can see how every bit of this starts creating more and more of the implied iceberg. Like, the fact that there is a calendar means that there are people who create and moderate things like counting time and documenting the order of things. And if the calendar is only 434 annums old, which that's a completely arbitrary number, but I was kind of trying to balance, like, if I make it like thousands of years old, then it's like, well, why hasn't society developed so much farther? I'm not really sure. So it's all, I don't have any idea what I'm doing. I'm just rolling with it for now. So if the calendar is only 434 years old, what happened before they started recording an official calendar? Like, how far back does this go? And these are all just questions about the Cascade that may or may not be answered in the future. Now, I wrote up the transmigration gates in some detail, like what they look like, how they function at a surface level, but simultaneously how they internally function is completely mysterious. I wanted to establish why opening and crossing through gates is kind of dangerous and also fairly restrictive. This seemed important to me because let's say you could just have a gate between these two spheres stay open forever. Well, then you kind of open up this issue of like ease of travel, and there would be very little reason for the bulk of the Cascade's population remaining near the top of the Cascade and stuff like that. So the way the gates work is they stay open for a number of seconds equal to a number of grams or crystals of elementium fed into the gate, but the delivery system for inputting elementium is of a very specific size. So you can only put in so much elementium at a time, which then creates this limitation, this time limitation. And of course, the gates were obviously built by someone. Who? And so all kinds of questions abound, right? Like, why did they put this limitation here, etc. More mystery equals more fun. Now, this idea of each sphere having a unique terrain or ecosystem is really too enormous. And I could, if I was smart, maybe change this notion so that it wasn't so wide open. But on the other hand, this feature of the Cascade is part of my game design aesthetic for this game, which is to try to create something that other people, players and whoever can riff on and expand however they want at their own speed. I think this will make sense later when we get into some of the scenario generation rules and stuff, but for now, I just wanted to give myself some bits to go on regarding the sphere interiors and how different they are from each other. So I just started jotting down a bunch of just random ideas. Like, the 14th sphere is completely full of water and drifting stones pocked with sea caves. The 6th sphere is alight with flying islands of sandstone and silica, thick clouds that burst with gemstone rain, and circling air sharks. Now, what's an air shark? I don't know. All I do know is it's gigantic. The 23rd sphere is packed solid with smoldering rock through which gargantuan tunnels snake and dive, running with lava. The 8th sphere is bisected by a single plane of obsidian upon which has grown a massive labyrinth of gigantic mold. The 17th sphere is blinded with a palpable darkness that crushes light and crawls with things that eat that which they cannot see. The 11th sphere is full of monstrous tornadoes of flame and monsters roaming hanging fortresses of iron and heavy black stone cut with alarming precision. The 2nd sphere houses a fairy tale landscape of rolling hills, forests of 100-meter tall trees, waterfalls, and emerald glades, and meadows where gravity fluctuates. The 9th sphere houses a desert spiked with enormous frozen peaks and massive, empty cities of strange, rusted architecture. The 15th sphere scintillates with a patchwork of dreamlike microbiomes, snow turning into sandstorms, river flowing backward up reverse waterfalls that climb up stacks of crushed ancient starships, etc. That was enough to at least get across some general flavor of what the spheres are like and the notion of how they are pretty whimsical and variant, one from the other. Then I rolled into thinking about the flora and fauna of the spheres, and to be honest, there's going to be almost an infinite amount of weird animals and monsters and plants that could be encountered, so I didn't dwell in this section too much. Basically, each sphere would have its own monster manual, so to speak, and then I wondered about electricity and magic. So it's kind of an example of my brain trying to fill in plot holes, because we have both sci-fi stuff and fantasy stuff. There's got to be electricity of some kind, right? For batteries and cybernetics and, vehicles or whatever, because they're going to be in there, right? So I'm just throwing down some weird words for the right vibes and doing some pseudo explanation, which is all we need to start exploring the setting, right? Talking about throwing down weird words, my thesaurus has been invaluable in this little exercise, as well as my eclectic YouTube feed, where I get videos on metaphysical spirituality, fringe metascience, and Harvard physics all at the same time. Damn it. Now I have the hiccups. Hiccups in the middle of shooting a YouTube video is not cool. This is how we get rid of hiccups. Try to focus on every finger, and you try to get each finger and your thumb as close as humanly possible. Each one, though, has to be as close as possible without touching. Come on, you can get it in there. Get closer. There we go. It's fine. It's kind of difficult to do. It's kind of difficult. Yeah. Get it. Oh, man. Then the hiccups go away. It's magic. All right, what was I saying? I absolutely wanted there to be a reason to have ruins and mysterious things like that. So, of course, I have to have a little section on that sort of thing. Then I started working on this table listing, and looks like I've got, 22 possible sphere descriptions so far. These are really even just pre-first draft. This is just total randomness for ideas' sake. I'm getting to the point where I think I'm going to have to maybe limit this initial core rulebook. Having information on 10 spheres will create more than enough content to play a lot of games, I think, if one were so inclined. And it leaves the possibility out there of doing an expansion pack sort of thing with batches of sphere-specific scenarios grouped by sphere as we get to the ones below, sphere number 10, on to 11, 12, just on and on and on. I don't know how all that's going to work yet, so we'll put a pin in that. So that's kind of like a lot of the lore stuff that I've been working on, just to keep you guys involved and let you see what I've been doing, and maybe you'll be inspired in some of your projects, whatever you're doing. Because, you should go explore an iceberg in your mind. Follow that stream of consciousness into a realm of adventure. See ya!